Welcome back to Write Out Loud. I'm Matt, and as always, I'm joined by the absolutely brilliant, endlessly enthusiastic, and crazy charismatic Christina.
I like that one, crazy charismatic.
Yes, well, today we're diving deep into one of the most unforgettable hours of television in recent memory. Episode 3 of The Last of Us, A Long, Long Time is the name of the episode. And this episode hit like an emotional freight train. A beautiful, devastating love story that somehow found light in the middle of a post-apocalyptic nightmare. So we're going to talk about the storytelling choices and the performances that absolutely wrecked us, how it differs, and why Bill and Frank's story lingers in your heart long after the credits roll. So grab your tissues, maybe a glass of wine, and let's get into it.
Yes. So I've been wanting to do this for an episode of our podcast since the show aired, because just myself as a viewer was watching it in real time. So it releases on Sunday nights. And it was the first time that I can recall that the credits started rolling and the song is playing, Long, Long Time by Linda Ronstadt. That was a theme throughout the episode. And I had to sit there in silence and listen to the song and just absorb what had just happened.
Sure.
And then shortly after that, I believe it was the next day, I always go online and see what the buzz is. I listen to the official podcast for the show as well. This wasn't in there, but it came across my desk was the writer of the episode is also one of the showrunners, Craig Mazin. And Craig Mazin, to me, is simply amazing, a genius when it comes to screenwriting and showrunning, because I'm a huge fan of Chernobyl. I'm not the type of person that usually watches that type of thing. But when it originally came out, I did not have HBO at the time. There was no streaming service for it. But when I did get the streaming, I watched Chernobyl, and it, again, should have won all the Emmys. Maybe did win all the Emmys. I'm not sure how many it did win. But Craig Mazin, the writer, producer, showrunner for that, as well as this, along with Neil Druckmann, who created the game. Okay. This particular episode was written by Craig Mazin. And I found out the next day, or perhaps it was the day after, but it was shortly after the episode aired, that Steven Spielberg wrote Craig Mazin a personal letter. Now, whether that was via email or a note, I don't know. I don't think any of the articles actually pinpointed that. But basically, I think it said something to the effect of, one of the best episodes of television ever. And I would agree. And for so many reasons, and a lot of those reasons we're going to get into here. But for the sake of discussion, for me, without this episode, I mean, there's multiple reasons, but this one thing in particular, it's a turning point in the relationship with the two main characters. And as far as writing goes, if you didn't do it in this way, you'd still have to do it in another way. And I think what they accomplished with this episode got them to the point that they needed to be, but also told such a beautiful story
Mhm.
And in fact, after I started talking to you about it, I became obsessed with like, okay, so how do we get the script for this? And I don't know how it happened other than, again, an article came across my desk and it was this series that featured Emmy material, because I don't think, maybe it was, no, perhaps it was already nominated for the Emmy at that point. Maybe that's what they were doing in the article. Anyway, there were like 5 different scripts from these shows
Mhm.
that were up for an Emmy. And this just happened to be one of them. And I'm like, man, we got the script. We got the script. So, and then things happen and finally we're doing it. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. It's an incredible piece of writing. And I think one of the things that's very interesting about it, the decisions that were made within the show, and
Yeah.
especially putting this episode in, is that we are slowing down this plot to
Yes.
tell this much deeper, richer story that's focused on these 2 people, right?
Yep.
And
Bill
like
and
you said,
Frank.
this pivotal moment that really deeply impacts the rest of the story as well. So it's not just like it's its own kind of silo,
Yeah.
but you definitely are making this conscious decision to say, okay, we're gonna stop for a second, basically, and just exist in this space. But
Yeah.
the payoff is going to be so much bigger.
Yeah. And it is completely bookended by
Mhm.
Joel and Ellie.
Mhm.
You know, they're on their way. They've just lost Tess. She sacrificed herself. She was dying anyway, but she sacrificed herself. And they're traveling because they promised Tess to get Ellie to Bill and Frank's. Now, what was going to happen after they got to Bill and Frank's? Part of me thinks that maybe Joel felt like, okay, I'm just going to drop her off there and go. She's going to become their responsibility.
Sure.
And as the episode opens, they're clearly on their way there. They're traveling. A couple things happen on the way. And then the way they transition to Bill and Frank, again, just the creativity into that. So I think maybe the best thing to do is just dive into the episode kind of step by step.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's jump in and talk through, because I think there's some things I want to point out too around decisions that writers can make.
Yeah.
That will have this type of an impact as well, and how you can craft that story to really build up the emotional impact and also just get you where you need to go in a much more fun and interesting way than just saying they found a car and off they go.
Yeah. Yeah. So this episode, like I said, starts with Ellie and Joel alone on their way to Bill and Frank's. Not sure where they're going to go after that because the Fireflies seem to be gone. And Tessa's gone and Joel is tasked with her. And of course, up until this point, Joel has been anti-Ellie, like rejecting her. How do we know she's immune?
Super annoyed by her.
Yeah, super annoyed by her. You know, and that of course comes from the loss of his daughter. And I think Ellie, if not in personality, just in age, reminds him of Sarah.
Yes. Yep.
And the fact that he couldn't save Sarah. So I really do think his mentality is dropping Ellie off and I'm done with her because I don't want to be responsible for another person. Because of course, he's still kind of feeling a little bit of guilt from the loss of Tess as well.
Yep.
So the one point I do want to talk about as far as the script is concerned, I was telling you when I first started reading the script, I don't know that I've ever read a script beyond. I've read plays. I've read things, you know, in college. I was an English major. Of course, I read plays and, you know, other things. Screenplays are very similar to playwriting. But I was so struck. And again, I have to harken back to, did Steven Spielberg understand that this was probably, you know, in the script? But it is so well written. And for me, reading it, it felt like reading a novel. Whereas other pieces of scripts that I've read, like when you watch the Oscars and it has best adapted screenplay or best original screenplay, they always have a little bit of the screenplay up and you can see it and they read from it. And they don't seem poetic to me. They seem very, what's the word? I want to use truncated. Stilted.
Or sterile.
Sterile. you know, and I think, oh, okay, well, the actors and everybody else afterwards adds that. And with Craig Mazin, I would say no. The first page is all very descriptive of that forest scene in the beginning. And I can so see a cinematographer, the director, really honing in on the things that Craig is explaining.
Sure.
He doesn't go too detailed, giving it, here's what you have to do. But simply, I'm going to read just a little portion of it. It's by the water, and it says, a hand bruised and cut lowers into the water. Joel winces as the water rolls over his bare hand. His breath puffs out in the frigid morning air. He's not wearing his coat, shivering, but he keeps his hand in the water, even though it hurts. I mean, that to me, that reads like a novel.
Yeah.
That would be something that you'd read in a novel. And again, one of the things I am not familiar with, but I'm excited to explore in the future, is this how every script is written? Is it very much from someone's point of view? To me, that is Joel's point of view. This is him feeling the wince, that sort of thing. It doesn't come across as direction for the actor. Joel winces.
Right.
Then further down the road, when they're walking. Now, I will say this, there were a couple of things that were not in the show that were in the script. So they may have been filmed, they might have been cut. And one of the things is when Joel and Ellie are talking about his scar, like, where did he get that scar? And he says, someone shot at me and they missed. And she's like, oh, did you shoot back? And he's like, yep. And I missed too. And she says, because you suck at shooting, or like in general? Joel, in general. And then he asks, where did you get your scar? And I don't remember that from the show. Breaking in, and she says breaking and entering at a 7-Eleven. But this is the part I wanted to read because it is so, to me, gives exactly what Joel is thinking. He's like, what the fuck? But before he can ask her to elaborate, she's already moved on to what she wants to talk about, which is guns, like the revolver holstered in his belt. Ellie, it's just the two of us. Maybe I should have. Joel, nope. Ellie shrugs. Whatever. I don't care. And then in parentheses, it says, yes, I do.
Yep.
And to me, that's, I'm sure it's seen as direction to the actors. But for me reading it, it was like I was reading a novel. So that's one of the things that impressed me so much about the actual mechanics of the screenplay.
Yeah, I do think that this is how most of them are, because I think you do have to paint enough of a picture so that the actor can kind of get into that feel of the character, right? Like, this is their mindset, this is what they're thinking, without, to your point, telling them specifically, I want you to raise your left eyebrow. I want you to, it's more about the general feeling of the scene and kind of painting the picture to let the actor get that feel for it and run with it. But
yeah,
it is interesting. I think they've done a nice job of, in the writing, laying out, again, just the gap between the two is narrowing, but ever so slowly. So slowly.
So the next thing I want to talk about is they're walking. Joel is like, okay, we're going to take this. We're going to cut across through the field. And Ellie's like, isn't it shorter if we walk this way? And he's like, there's stuff up there you don't want to see. And then, of course, that magnetizes Ellie, like she's going to go see it. And I love the transition from that moment of seeing the bones, but the clothes that were tattered and just the cloth.
Yep.
But then the camera comes back and now you're seeing the mother and child that were wearing those clothes. And we've gone back to the beginning. So one of the things that I think is important with this episode, as I said, for me, it's a very pivotal episode. But here's the other thing. It takes you back to the beginning, or where we would have left off after that first night. So we see Joel, Tommy, and Sarah the first night and what happens to them. And then we don't see anymore. Now we see what happened after the military collects you or doesn't collect you. Those that there weren't enough space for them were taken to this field and killed. Because, of course, you don't want anybody giving them an opportunity to become another cordyceps. You want to get rid of all the cordyceps and start over. People were sacrificial. But then it shows this couple, of course, that has been talked about in the previous episode, and they're absolutely good friends of Joel and Tessa's. And we see them from beginning to end. So again, it was this beautiful way of showing what happened rather than just saying, hey, catch the audience up. This is the type of thing that happened then. So I think it was a really great opportunity, again, to bookend Ellie and Joel on both ends, but have this beautiful love story, tragic, but beautiful love story in the middle.
Yeah. Well, I think what it does too is it gives a nice contrast, because the show itself feels so dark and so hopeless as they're going through it. Like they're just scratching by to survive. Yeah. And there's such a bleak outlook to it, right? Like if you get bit, well, you're screwed. And except for Ellie, and there's nothing else that you can do about it. So you've got to just, they made the point over and over again. There's no vaccines. There's no cure. There's nothing that you can do for it. Like we're just dead. And then you take that and go, okay, let's refresh the audience a little bit. Let's again bring them to hope and to love, and let's draw this sort of transitional phase in, and let the audience just sort of take a breath, right, and just sort of enjoy, because we're going to put them right back in it real quick. Yeah. So let's just give them this little respite, and I think it deepens the impact of it. But I think it's really well done and well executed.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that it shows is the differences in how people handled the outbreak and life thereafter. So Bill is this prepper, and I'm putting in air quotes, survivalist, because during the middle of the episode, he corrects Joel and says, I'm not a prepper, I'm a survivalist. But he seemed to know exactly how he wanted this whole thing to go. Like from beginning, he was down in that underground and the wall of guns, as Ellie calls it, with the multiple cameras, being able to see everywhere. Then as soon as everybody leaves, he comes out in his gas mask. Okay, everything's okay. But then he heads straight to the Home Depot. And then right from the Home Depot, he goes to the electric company or the gas company or whatever it was, and turns everything back on, hooks it back up, builds this fence around this place. And I also thought it was very interesting, too, that as time continues, Bill would add things to it, especially after Joel came and said, hey, that fence isn't going to last much longer. You're going to need some stuff I have access to. But beyond that, I actually laughed out loud, because the next scene is you see the fence and there's the cars piled up on top of the fence. So you know that this beautiful respite from the darkness of the story, but also some comic relief, and of course, the love story between Bill and Frank, to me, was totally unexpected. I have not played the games. I had never heard of The Last of Us. And in fact, I found The Last of Us because I was a fan of Craig Mazin, and people were talking about this. People were excited about it. And I knew it was a game, but had no knowledge of it. So I just wanted to watch it for Craig Mazin's amazing writing. So I was surprised. I was surprised that they did this, and weaving in the song was a theme throughout. And as I said before, I don't know if it was before earlier in this episode, that I think it was the first time that I sat through the credits like that and had to just absorb what I had just watched. And as well as I wanted to listen to the full song. I didn't just want to, listen to it that way.
Well, and speaking of the game, just to take a quick time out, right? Like, it is very different from the game, because Bill is much, much, much darker in the actual game. Frank is actually gone before anybody ever meets Bill. Like he's long gone in the game. So this is interesting because they were able to build this whole new canon for the show. But again, it humanized the characters and helped bring a little more depth to the story. So it was a really, really smart move.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the memorable moments from the episode, of course, are the strawberries.
Yes.
We'll never look at strawberries the same again. And the thing is, and this is totally the actor, because I was actually looking for that in the script.
Mm-hmm.
But when Bill takes that first bite and he just giggles. Like he giggles and falls into that was not in the script. So I got to imagine that was Nick Offerman. Now, Nick Offerman, I do know, won the Emmy for this episode as, I think, guest actor. So, he deserved it if for nothing more than that, giggle with the strawberry, because you just felt the delight of not having tasted a strawberry. And at that point, it had to have been around 10 years into the outbreak, not having that. And again, they found these little moments. This is how Tess and Frank met. And then, they had lunch together, and, Joel said, we can trade for things. There are things we can get you that you need. And then later, Frank says he traded one of Bill's guns for the strawberry seeds.
Yeah. And he's like, which one?
Yeah, exactly.
Which one?
Who cares about the strawberries?
It doesn't matter.
Which one? Yeah, just a little one.
It's okay. You have plenty of guns.
Yes.
I will say too, I think back to just that respite that you get, what's also really, really, really smart about this is it breathes purpose again back into the show. And by that, I mean, not the show itself, but like the drive to want the world to be better again, want the world to heal. It gives it something to like, oh yeah, that's right. There is something possible out here that we could do if we tried hard enough.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also an episode. So when I said that it bookends, so the tragedy of the episode is actually caught up in time. Now, I don't know how many hours 600 hours are, but 600 hours is the amount of time that it took for the music to start or him to reset the music. So a time in between when Ellie and Joel arrived as to when dear Bill and Frank departed, which, God, it's, again, hard to say. We started to love them over this episode. I had no idea that they were going to die. I will say immediately when Frank talked about whatever it was that he had, they didn't name it, but said there was no cure when
even before
was, yeah, exactly. And my brain went straight to ALS.
Yeah.
Now, in the script, it did say disease like ALS or Parkinson's. They don't actually name what it is specifically. But I had an aunt who died from ALS. And I can tell you that if that's the way it, like if you got ALS during this end of the world piece of, hereafter, I would have been like Frank. You're not going to want to live out without the medicines and caretakers and all of that. And I can absolutely understand Bill. Like, as soon as he agreed to it, I thought he agreed to it because he's going out with him.
Yeah.
So it was, I don't want to say it was predictable.
It took him a bit though. Like he was very much like, he's like, I don't want, no. He kind of fought with it initially.
Yeah.
I think he got there pretty quickly. I do want to say though, I think it's interesting that they just kind of happen to have this medicine somewhere that they found. And I was like,
I do think they got that from Joel and
possibly
Tess. Because I think because Joel specifically mentions medicine. We
Mm.
have access to medicines that you don't.
That's a good point.
So I think that's, yeah. So that's the other thing too, that I want to definitely mention is they were so detailed.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't know if I see any plot holes. Like I said, I actually kind of understand why they didn't name the disease.
Oh, 100%.
And let people go with the imagination.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's the same conversation that we've had too before around like a lot of authors that don't physically describe their characters because they want people to kind of have their own image in their heads maybe, or they're like, it doesn't really matter, right? It doesn't really drive the story forward if I tell you she's got green eyes and red streaks in her hair. Like, same thing here. I think it was just you understood very clearly that his disease was debilitating, and very much like you understood, like, you're like, okay, and I get the sense that it's probably Parkinson's like that, or ALS or something.
It was degenerative because you could see the progression in the paintings.
Yes.
And also in his physical ability, from the wheelchair to being able to the painting that was just, he couldn't hold his hand steady.
Yeah. But I think that's good for, again, letting the audience kind of just roll with it, right? Like you don't necessarily have to specifically say all of those details. As a writer, you can leave some of that stuff open to some interpretation.
Yeah.
As long as it's clear enough that the audience understands what they're dealing with.
So the purpose. So kind of circling back to what we started with is that the purpose of this episode was a turning point with Joel and Ellie. And they also got to showcase what happened at the beginning of the outbreak through the time that Joel and Ellie show up. And I think, to me, without this episode, they'd have to figure out another way, because I really do believe that Joel's intention was to leave Ellie with Bill and Frank. And I think that's why maybe they made the decision to deviate from the game, in that Bill in the game, if I'm understanding it correctly, he's still alive, or at least at some point he's still alive, and Ellie meets him and knows him. But here they're killing him off.
Yep.
But I think it's really great the way that they work it with that letter. And the letter, actually, again, I think it's a little bit of a funny point, because it's technically addressed to Joel, but it says to whomever, probably Joel. And Ellie goes, well, I qualify as whomever. I'm not going to hand it to Joel. And so, and then part of the letter, and then I can't remember exactly what Bill had written, but then he wrote he.
Yeah.
And Ellie, again, there was some comic relief there. Yeah. The most important part in the whole purpose of the letter was because Bill imparts on Joel that those two are so much alike, and they both had purpose. And their purpose was to keep their loved ones alive.
Yep. Which,
of course, backfires, because one of his loved ones, or presumably, was Tess, and he has not saved her. And they don't know about Sarah. He didn't save Sarah. There might be more people in between that he did not save. So I think in that moment, he makes a split-second decision of, okay, I'm going to get Ellie where she needs to go. I'm going to go find my brother, and maybe he knows where these Fireflies, this hospital is, and I'm going to get her there. And I think you would have had a harder time as a writer figuring out how to get to that pivotal point with them. Does he like her? No, because he still calls her cargo in the truck at one point. And there are other things that you still see that, but I think this is the first corner turned toward liking her.
Sure.
Towards,
or at least thinking he could protect her.
Thinking that he could protect her. Like, maybe this is somebody that won't die under my care. I don't know. I don't think it was that. I don't think he was that drastic with it. And again, I think if that letter hadn't been there, he would have been like, okay, we're done here. I don't know what else to do. I'm going to go out to Wyoming. You're welcome to come with, but I'm not going to take care of you.
Otherwise, stay here.
Yeah. So, and then again, them leaving in the truck. It's funny with the whole seatbelt thing and how she's, in the car. No. You've never been in a car before, have you?
Nope.
It's like a spaceship. And then getting on the seatbelt and she doesn't know what a seatbelt is. And so again, the comic relief. And then she finds Frank's mixtape for Bill and it's got the Linda Ronstadt song on there. So they wove it in there so naturally. Like it didn't feel forced. And I think that is like the one thing that if you're not going to take anything else away from this episode, this is the one thing I want you to take away as a writer, is that there is a great way to do everything. Like to do it naturally. It shouldn't feel forced. None of this episode felt forced. It felt natural. It felt like the progression. It felt this was a real, love story between Bill and Frank. This was a real change of dynamic between Ellie and Joel. Yeah, I think without this episode, it wouldn't have. And I think maybe that's what Steven Spielberg also felt in it. There, again, there's so many things about this episode. When we were discussing earlier about how we were going to discuss this, we always do this pre-recording episode, how we're going to approach it, what are some key points we want to make sure. And Matt was like, so what are we going to talk about? And I said, oh my God, there's so many things. There's so many different ways you can come at this episode, because it wasn't just, okay, here's the one thing that we've got to get done. It was, we have to get this done, this. I mean, they must have had a list.
Yeah.
And then Craig wrote it in such a way that, and again, I should give some credit to Neil Druckmann, who created the game, because he created the characters. The character of Frank was named. The gamers may have known some things about him. But he built the structure, and Craig Mazin filled in all the walls and furnished the house, so to speak. So I think going back to the one thing that I would say I would like you to take away if you're thinking about how to craft your own story is think about these transitional elements. Think about the times where you have to get from A to B, and how do you make it more interesting? How do you breathe more humanity into it and breathe more depth and feeling? Because anytime you do that, the story is just going to be that much better for it. So it is worth the investment of time to spend thinking about how you sort of weave in those little threads that kind of move things along. The threads and the details. That's what the takeaway from this episode is, the threads and the details.
Absolutely. Well, that is an amazing episode. I'm glad that we got to talk about it, right? Because we've been thinking about having this episode for a very long time.
Well,
let's do it.
With the airing of current season 2, which Matt is not caught up on, so I can't even discuss it with them.
Nope. Not yet.
Yes, we had to do it.
All right. Well, that's going to wrap up the conversation on The Last of Us, episode 3, a long, long time. Huge thank you for listening. We know how special this episode is to so many people, and it is an honor to break that down with all of you. So if today's talk resonated with you, if you laughed, you cried, you found yourself humming long, long time afterwards, we would love for you to leave us a review, subscribe, and share the podcast with your fellow fans. Until next time, stay safe, hold on to hope, and remember, sometimes the best stories aren't about surviving, they're about living. Until then, write out loud. Hey, thanks so much for listening to the podcast. We really hope that you're enjoying every bit of it, but we would love to hear your feedback. Drop us an email, either to Matt at writeoutloudpod.com or Christina at bookmatchmaker.com. We would love to hear your thoughts. What's working, what's not working, and what do you want to hear more of? Thanks so much. We really appreciate it.